Welcome to this monthly social listening update. It focuses on online conversations about immigrants in South Africa, and it is the third such report from the Centre for Analytics and Behavioral Change. The report covers the month of June 2024. The report looks at the conversation volume, key metrics, topical events, and which authors are driving the conversation. And the focal point during June 2024 was definitely the announcement of the results of South Africa's national and provincial elections. In terms of the conversation volume, for the month of June, there were 416,560 total mentions in the conversation, and these were made by 104,600 unique authors. This represents an increase of 2% compared to May 2024, so the conversation is staying quite stable there. It is also fairly noticeable that there is a high number of total X reposts, Twitter reposts, a number that is 386,940, resulting in a retweet percentage of 93%. The CABC regards this percentage as high, and we've seen this in previous studies on xenophobia conversation before. A high retweet percentage is an indicator that the conversation may be subject to narrative manipulation, as heavy retweeting is generally used to amplify particular narratives online. The topical events, the election results, as mentioned, were quite topical and of high interest during the reporting period. In the remarks at the Independent Electoral Commission event at which the election results were announced on the 2nd of June 2024, President Cyril Ramaphosa referenced putting South Africa first. Now, we aren't sure if he knows that this is a popular hashtag that xenophobic content is regularly posted under, or if he was simply using the words in the regular sense thereof. Central to the Patriotic Alliance's election campaign was a call for the mass deportation of illegal foreigners, a position which they sustained into the post-election period. The EFF's open border policy and its anti-xenophobia position is discussed in the conversation as having cost them at the polls. But EFF President Julius Malema said this was not true and that the EFF would not compromise a principle to please non-existing voters. When it came to the Government of National Unity negotiations, ahead of the negotiations, the Patriotic Alliance's leader, Gayton McKenzie, stated particularly which ministerial seats he was hoping for, and that his number one preference was to be the Minister of Home Affairs. And during an interview with Eyewitness News, he said, "We are going to use the seats very strategically to make it very uncomfortable for any illegal foreigner in this country." The trending hashtags, as you can see here, are number one top hashtag in the conversation was hashtag Abahambe, number two was hashtag Ons Baizani, and number three was hashtag Put South Africans First. Abahambe and Ons Baizani are hashtags that are associated with the Patriotic Alliance, and when you look at the content tweeted with these hashtags, you can see that the Patriotic Alliance used its positioning on illegal immigrants as a electioneering position. When it came to the top reach content, the highest X posts were number one was a post by Chris Excel, a popular influencer, and he says the difference between people from Kenya and people from Zimbabwe when it's time to fight for their rights, and then has a picture of Kenyans and one of Zimbabweans, The Kenyans are standing with their flag at a protest that had to do with opposing their finance bill for 2024, whilst the picture of the Zimbabwean shows a man jumping over a presumably a border fence, probably meant to be illegally coming into another country. And then the second highest reach ex post was one that says, "Come here, Africans," and it contains a video of a large number of trucks, and these trucks appear to be entering South Africa. And I think that the implication of this tweet is that the trucks perhaps contain people who want to illegally immigrate into the country. In terms of the authors, the most mentioned Twitter or X posters were top poster was a mentioned poster was at Ons Baizani, followed by the leader of the Patriotic Alliance, Gate McKenzie, followed by our DA, followed by EFF South Africa, My ANC, Helen Zille, Freedom Front Plus, Kenny Kunene, IEC, and Julius Malema. Now, with the exception of the IEC, all of these are political parties or their leaders, and all of them have varying positions on immigrants in South Africa. So this is not to say that all of them were posting xenophobic content. It's more that they were present as being mentioned by posters in the conversation. When we look at the posters that were generating the most amount of content on Twitter/X, then we can see a trend within these accounts is that they tend not to reveal their identity. So they have strange photos and don't say what their name is. And that could be because they're trying to conceal their identity, since they're posting quite a lot of content that is hateful. In terms of an analysis and commentary on the conversation, a 2% increase in mentions was recorded as mentioned, and it suggests that there's continued public interest in the topic of immigrants in South Africa, and that potentially this is driven by the recent election. A significant proportion of the conversation, 93%, consists of retweets, and this could be a sign of coordinated efforts to amplify specific narratives, and particularly when considering the presence of political parties in the top 10 most mentioned authors lists. The recent election results and subsequent government formation discussions appear to be a major driver of the conversation, and we point out here that the Patriotic Alliance Party's anti-immigrant rhetoric is quite noticeable. The top trending hashtags originate from the Patriotic Alliance, suggesting their attempt to shape the online discussion around xenophobia in the context of the elections and the formation of a government of national unity. The report also identifies prominent hashtags like hashtag Put South Africans First that promote prioritizing South African immigrants over those South African interests over those of immigrants, indicating the sustained presence of an anti-immigrant movement online. We have some recommendations for civil society organizations, campaigns, and the media. These are to leverage insights from these reports to tailor messaging and interventions to address the most prevalent narratives and concerns surrounding immigrants, to recognize prominent influencers and online communities driving xenophobic rhetoric and develop strategies to counter their narratives, to organize workshops, dialogues, and cultural exchange events that foster positive interactions between citizens and immigrants, to lobby for policies that address immigration and which address legitimate concerns about job competition fairly and strengthen protections for immigrants, and to regularly evaluate the effectiveness of interventions and adjust approaches accordingly. Thank you for listening to this update.